Before them, we were children. Before us, they were toys. The humans. We saw their soft skin, their strange, open smiles, and we whispered amongst ourselves on Nexus Station. How utterly pathetic. We mocked their diplomats, dismissed their gentle ways as weakness, and measured their worth against our own battle scars. Foolish. Oh, by the blazing void, how exquisitely catastrophically foolish we were. For on the day I truly saw a human fight, I didn't just witness terror, I learned its true name, and it was carved not in blood, but in the chilling, methodical silence of a species that had simply had enough. The soft species that smiled too much. Krex pressed his scaled face against the observation deck's reinforced viewing panel and watched the human transport dock at Nexus Station. The vessel looked pitiful compared to the massive Thicarian battleships that filled the military bays. Its rounded hull gleamed white and blue, lacking the sharp edges and weapon arrays that mark proper warships. Even the trading vessels of lesser species showed more aggressive design than this peaceful-looking craft. The young Thicarian warrior flexed his natural armor plates and felt the familiar weight of his bone ridges beneath his thick hide. His people had evolved on a world where only the strongest survived, where every day brought new challenges that required physical power and mental toughness. Their dark green skin could deflect most energy weapons, and their clawed hands could tear through steel plating. They were what warriors should be, not like these strange new creatures that had recently joined the galactic community. Commander Voss approached from behind, his massive frame casting a shadow over Krex. The older Thicarian's battle scars told stories of countless victories against pirates, rebels, and hostile species. His deep voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through strength and courage. "The humans have arrived," Voss growled, his words echoing through his chest cavity. "Watch them carefully, young warrior. Study how they move, how they speak, how they reveal their weaknesses. The Council wants to know if these newcomers can be trusted or if they pose a threat." Krex nodded and turned his attention to the docking bay below. The airlock cycled open with a soft whisper, and the first humans emerged into the station's main corridor. They moved with none of the proud bearing that marked true warriors. Instead, they walked with an easy, relaxed pace that spoke of either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of danger. Given what Krex had heard about their peaceful nature, he suspected the latter. The human leader was a male of average height, with short gray hair, and wearing what appeared to be a simple dark uniform. He carried no visible weapons, showed no natural armor, and his soft pink skin looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. This was Commander Sarah Chun, according to the intelligence reports, their first diplomatic representative to the galactic community. Behind her walked a tall male with kind eyes and gentle movements, Dr. Michael Torres, their chief scientist and cultural specialist. The third human caught Krex's attention because she seemed different from the others. This one had the bearing of someone accustomed to giving orders, her posture straight, and her eyes constantly scanning the area around them. Captain Elena Rodriguez, their military advisor, at least looked like she understood the concept of danger. But even she seemed relaxed, her hands loose at her sides instead of positioned near weapons. "Look at them," Voss said with obvious disgust. "They walk among potential enemies without fear, without preparation. They expose their backs to strangers and smile at species they have never met. Either they are the most foolish race in the galaxy, or they hide their true nature behind this pathetic display." Krex watched as the humans approached a group of Zephyrian merchants. The bird-like species were known for their aggressive trading practices and their tendency to test newcomers through intimidation tactics. Their sharp beaks and razor-edged feathers made them formidable opponents in close combat. Several of the larger Zephyrians surrounded the human delegation, their feathers ruffled in threat displays. What happened next confused Krex greatly. Instead of backing away or showing signs of fear, Commander Chen simply looked up at the towering bird creatures and smiled warmly. She spoke in a calm, pleasant voice that somehow carried across the noisy docking bay. "Hello, I'm Commander Chen. We're honored to meet representatives of the famous Zephyrian Merchant Guild. We've heard wonderful things about your trading expertise and your beautiful homeworld." The lead Zephyrian warrior paused, his aggressive posture faltering at the unexpected response. Chun continued talking, asking questions about Zephyrian culture and trade routes with genuine interest and respect. Within minutes, the potential confrontation had transformed into an animated discussion about interstellar commerce. The other Zephyrians joined in, their threatening behavior replaced by what almost looked like curiosity and pleasure. Dr. Torres had moved on to greet a group of crystalline Xerians, speaking to them as if they were old friends despite their completely alien appearance. His relaxed demeanor seemed to affect everyone around him, creating an atmosphere of cooperation rather than competition. He asked thoughtful questions about their silicon-based biology and showed genuine fascination with their responses. This is their weakness, Voss declared, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. They treat potential enemies as friends. They show trust where they should show strength. They will not survive long in a galaxy where only the strong prosper and the weak become slaves or food. But Krex found himself studying the humans more carefully. There was something about their behavior that didn't quite match what he expected from a weak species. They showed no fear, but they also showed no aggression. They were polite without being submissive, confident without being arrogant. It was like watching a completely different kind of creature, one that operated by rules he didn't understand. Captain Rodriguez had positioned herself where she could observe the entire docking bay while still appearing casual and friendly. Her eyes missed nothing, cataloging every species present and their positions. When a group of Saurian mercenaries entered the bay, the human military advisor's attention sharpened almost imperceptibly. She didn't move, didn't change her relaxed posture, but something in her stillness suggested she was ready for instant action. The doctor. Torres had somehow managed to gather representatives from 8 different species around him, all of them talking excitedly about their various cultures and technologies. He listened to each one with genuine fascination, asking questions that showed both intelligence and respect. Even the normally hostile reptilian traders seemed charmed by his obvious interest in learning about their society. Commander Chen was conducting what appeared to be impromptu diplomatic negotiations, mediating a minor dispute between 2 trading groups with such skill that both sides seemed pleased with the outcome. Her voice never rose above a conversational tone, but her words carried a weight that commanded attention from species that usually respected only physical strength. I will observe them more closely, Krex told his commander. Perhaps their weakness can be exploited. If they trust so easily, they should be simple to manipulate or deceive. Voss's approval rumbled through his chest. Yes, young warrior. Learn their ways. Discover their vulnerabilities. The Thicarian Empire may find these humans useful as servants once they understand their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. But as Krex watched the humans continue their interactions, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to them than met the eye. They moved through the dangerous environment of Nexus Station like they belonged there, showing neither the arrogance of the strong nor the fear of the weak. They were something else entirely, and that thought was beginning to worry him more than he cared to admit. Over the following days, Krex found excuses to observe the humans from various locations around the station. He told himself it was intelligence gathering, but truthfully, their behavior fascinated him in ways he couldn't explain. They moved through the station like they had lived there for years, adapting to new situations with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. The medical bay became his first observation post. Dr. Torres worked there constantly, treating injured beings from dozens of different species. Krex watched from the corridor as he examined a wounded crystalline trader whose silicon-based biology was completely unlike anything from the human homeworld. Torres studied reference materials, asked careful questions, and somehow managed to stabilize the creature's damaged structure using techniques he had apparently learned in just a few hours. What struck Krex most was how Torres treated every patient the same way. When a Thicarian dock worker came in with a crushed hand, he showed the same gentle care he had given the crystalline. When a group of young Zephyrians arrived with injuries from a training accident, he worked on them with the same focused attention he gave to everyone else. He didn't seem to distinguish between friend and enemy, between powerful and weak, between beautiful and hideous by galactic standards that a Saurian mercenary brought in his injured partner, clearly expecting to negotiate payment for treatment. Dr. Torres simply looked at the wounded creature and began working immediately. When the Saurian tried to discuss payment, Torres waved him off without even looking up from his patient. "We can talk about that later," he said quietly. "Right now, your friend needs help." The Saurian stared at him in confusion. In his culture, nothing was given without payment or trade. The idea of helping a stranger without immediate reward seemed to break his understanding of how the universe worked. But Torres continued his work, completely focused on healing the injured creature, and gradually the Saurian's suspicious expression changed to something like wonder. Krex found himself moving to the station's common areas where Commander Chen spent much of her time. The human diplomat had an unusual habit of simply sitting in busy areas and talking to whoever approached her. She didn't seem to be conducting official business or pursuing any particular agenda. She just talked to people, listened to their stories, and somehow made them feel heard and understood. That an elderly Zerothian trader sat down beside Chen one afternoon, looking tired and discouraged. Krex positioned himself close enough to hear their conversation. The Zerothian explained how his shipping business was failing because larger companies kept undercutting his prices. He couldn't compete with their resources and would probably have to sell his ship and work for someone else. Chen listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions that showed she understood the challenges the Zerothian faced. When the old trader finished his story, Chen didn't offer empty sympathy or impossible solutions. Instead, she suggested specific trade routes that might be more profitable for a smaller operation and mentioned other independent traders who might be interested in forming a cooperative. By the end of their conversation, the Zerothian's entire demeanor had changed. He sat straighter, his voice carried more confidence, and he spoke about his business with renewed hope. Chen had given him something more valuable than money or resources. She had given him a reason to believe things could get better. Krex watched this scene repeat itself dozens of times over the following days. Chen talked to maintenance workers, security guards, traders, diplomats, and refugees. Each conversation seemed to leave the other person feeling better about their situation. It was like watching someone cast a spell, except the magic was nothing more than genuine attention and thoughtful advice. But it was Captain Rodriguez who proved most interesting to observe. She spent time in the station's recreation areas where off-duty security personnel and military officers from various species gathered to relax. Unlike the other humans, Rodriguez seemed to have no particular agenda beyond enjoying herself. She played games, shared stories, and participated in friendly competitions with beings from across the galaxy. Krex watched Rodriguez arm wrestle with a Thicarian security officer twice her size. The human lost, of course, but she laughed about it and bought drinks for everyone present. Later, she joined a strategy game between several Zephyrian officers and managed to hold her own despite being unfamiliar with their tactics. When a Zerothian pilot challenged her to a flight simulation, Rodriguez accepted eagerly, even though she had never flown a Zerothian vessel before. What puzzled Krex was how easily Rodriguez formed connections with these potential enemies. By the end of each evening, the human was surrounded by officers from species that had been fighting each other for centuries, all of them laughing and sharing stories like old friends. It seemed impossible that someone could be so universally liked without some kind of deception or hidden agenda involved. The breaking point came when Krex overheard Rodriguez talking to a young Saurian officer who had been ostracized by his own people for questioning their aggressive traditions. The Saurian was bitter and angry, convinced that strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe and that his people's way was the only path to survival. Rodriguez listened to his complaints without judgment, then quietly began telling stories about her own experiences. The stories were unlike anything Krex had heard before. Rodriguez spoke of humans who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. She told of soldiers who had held positions against overwhelming forces, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to protect something important. She described rescue workers who had risked their lives to save strangers, explorers who had ventured into deadly situations to expand knowledge, and ordinary people who had done extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. These weren't the peaceful, gentle stories Krex had expected from a diplomatic species. These were tales of determination, sacrifice, and a kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that seemed almost insane. The humans in Rodriguez's stories didn't win because they were stronger or smarter than their enemies. They won because they simply would not stop trying, no matter how hopeless the situation became. The young Saurian listened with growing fascination, his bitter expression gradually changing to something like respect. When Rodriguez finished, the Saurian sat quietly for a long moment before speaking. "Your people fight differently than ours," he said. "Finally, we fight for dominance, for territory, for resources. But you fight for ideas, for other people, for things that have no physical form." That seems both foolish and terrifying at the same time. Rodriguez smiled and raised her drink in a toast. "To fighting for foolish things," she said. "May we always be brave enough to protect what matters, even when it doesn't make sense." Krex found himself thinking about those words long after the conversation ended. What did humans consider worth fighting for? What would drive a species that seemed so peaceful to the kind of desperate determination Rodriguez had described? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen if someone threatened the things humans had decided to protect? The questions followed him back to his quarters, where he spent the night staring at the ceiling and wondering if he was beginning to understand something important about these strange, soft creatures who had joined the galactic community with such quiet confidence. When the laughing stopped the emergency, alert shattered the peaceful atmosphere of Nexus Station like a plasma bolt through. Crystal. Krex was in the observation lounge when the station's communication system crackled to life with desperate voices from the outer colonies. He watched the holographic display materialize in the center of the room, showing a map of the local sector with red warning indicators flashing across multiple locations. Slavers from the Void Syndicate had struck again. This time they had hit New Haven, a peaceful agricultural colony that housed families from dozens of different species. The attackers had overwhelmed the minimal security forces and taken thousands of hostages, including hundreds of children. The distress signals painted a picture of chaos and terror as the slavers began sorting their prisoners for transport to illegal markets across the galaxy. Krex moved closer to the display, studying the tactical situation. New Haven was positioned in a remote system far from major trade routes and military installations. The slavers had chosen their target well, knowing that the isolated location would delay any rescue response. Around the lounge, representatives from various species gathered to watch the unfolding crisis. Thicarian officers discussed the military challenges of reaching the colony before the slavers could escape with their prisoners. Zephyrian merchants calculated the economic impact of losing a major food-producing world. Zerothian diplomats debated the legal complications of mounting a rescue mission in neutral space. Everyone had opinions, but no one seemed prepared to act quickly enough to save the hostages. The humans stood apart from the others, clustered around their own portable communication device. Commander Chen listened intently to the reports coming in from the colony, her usual pleasant expression growing more serious with each update. Dr. Torres clenched his hands into fists as he heard descriptions of injured civilians who couldn't receive proper medical care. Captain Rodriguez stood perfectly still, but something in her posture had changed completely that a new transmission arrived from New Haven, and the lounge fell silent as the voice of the slaver commander filled the room. Grimjaw SEK was a notorious Saurian who had been terrorizing the outer colonies for decades. His reputation for cruelty was legendary throughout the galaxy, and his distinctive cybernetic jaw had become a symbol of fear among peaceful settlements. "I speak to all who can hear this message," Grimjaw SEK snarled, his voice carrying the harsh accent of the criminal underworld. "New Haven now belongs to the Void Syndicate. We hold over 2,000 hostages, including 300 younglings of various species. Our demands are simple: 50 million credits in untraceable currency, delivered within 72 hours, or we begin processing the prisoners for sale. The transmission included video footage from the colony showing terrified families huddled together in detention facilities. Children of different species clung to their parents, while armed slavers moved among them with casual brutality. The images were designed to inspire fear and quick compliance with the demands. Krex watched the various species representatives react to the ultimatum. Some began discussing payment options, calculating whether the cost of ransom would be less than the expense of a military operation. Others debated the political implications of negotiating with criminals. A few suggested that the hostages were acceptable losses if it meant avoiding setting a dangerous precedent. The human reaction was different. Commander Chen's diplomatic mask didn't slip, but it seemed to become more rigid, like armor being put on for battle. Her voice remained calm and professional as she activated her communication device, but her words carried an undertone that made Krex's scales prickle with unease. "This is Commander Chun of the Human Diplomatic Mission," she said, speaking directly to the slavers. "We are prepared to discuss terms for the release of all hostages. No harm must come to any of the prisoners during negotiations. This is not a request." Dr. Torres was no longer the gentle healer Krex had observed over the past weeks. He moved with quick, efficient motions as he began gathering medical supplies and equipment. His hands were steady, but his eyes held a cold anger that seemed completely at odds with his caring nature. He spoke quietly to Chun and Rodriguez, his voice too low for Krex to hear, but his expression suggested he was discussing something far more serious than medical preparation. Rodriguez had become someone else entirely. The friendly, laughing human who had shared drinks with alien soldiers was gone, replaced by something that made Krex's warrior instinct scream warnings. Rodriguez wasn't showing any obvious signs of aggression, but her stillness had a quality that reminded Krex of a predator preparing to strike. The slavers responded to Chen's diplomatic overture with predictable arrogance. Grimjaw SEK appeared on screen again, his cybernetic jaw gleaming in the harsh lighting of the colony's command center. "Humans," he laughed, the sound distorted by his mechanical voice box. "I have heard of your species. Soft creatures who think words can solve everything. Perhaps I should demonstrate the price of your weakness." The video feed switched to show a group of hostages being dragged before the camera. An elderly Zerothian female, a young Thakarian male, and a Zephyrian child barely old enough to fly. The slavers forced them to kneel, while Grimjaw SEK drew his weapon with theatrical slowness. "You have 71 hours to deliver the credits," he announced. "For every hour you are late, 10 hostages will be processed for immediate sale. But since you humans seem to think you can negotiate, let me show you what happens to those who waste my time." The execution was swift and brutal. 3 lives ended in an instant while the remaining hostages screamed in terror. The slavers laughed at the carnage, treating the murder of innocents as entertainment. Grimjaw SEK looked directly into the camera with satisfaction, clearly believing he had demonstrated his power effectively. The transmission ended, leaving the lounge in stunned silence. Around the room, various species began discussing response options with renewed urgency. Some called for immediate payment of the ransom. Others suggested that military action was now inevitable. A few muttered about the need to accept that some hostages would be lost. Krex found himself watching the humans instead of listening to the debates. What he saw made his blood run cold with a fear he had never experienced before, not even in his first battle against space pirates. Commander Chin stood motionless for a long moment, her head slightly bowed. When she finally looked up, her eyes held something that Krex had never seen in a supposedly peaceful species. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was something far more terrifying, absolute certainty. "Elena," Chin said quietly, her voice barely audible above the surrounding discussions. "You have operational command. Primary objective is hostage recovery. Secondary objective is complete elimination of the Void Syndicate organization. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. No survivors among the slavers." Rodriguez nodded once, her expression never changing. "Understood, Commander. Michael, prepare for mass casualty treatment." We'll need trauma facilities ready for immediate deployment. Dr. Torres's response was equally calm. Medical teams will be ready. I'll also need body bags, Sarah. Lots of them. The casual way he spoke about death while preparing to save lives sent a chill through Krex's body. These weren't the gentle, peaceful humans he had been observing. These were something else entirely, something that had been hidden beneath their diplomatic facade like a blade wrapped in silk. As the humans began making their preparations, Krex realized that he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of what these creatures truly were. The slavers had made a fatal error in judgment, mistaking human compassion for weakness. They had just awakened something that had been sleeping behind kind eyes and gentle words. Commander Voss appeared beside Krex, his massive frame tense with anticipation. Now, we will see what these humans are truly made of, he rumbled. Perhaps they will prove more interesting than we initially believed. Krex nodded, but his attention remained focused on the humans. They were no longer the diplomatic team that had arrived at Nexus Station. They had become something else, something that moved with quiet purpose and spoke in voices that carried the promise of violence. He was beginning to understand that he had been watching the wrong thing all along. The humans' peaceful nature wasn't their weakness. It was their choice, and that choice had just been revoked. The Joint Task Force assembled faster than Krex had thought possible. Within 8 hours of the slaver ultimatum, ships from multiple species had formed a loose fleet heading toward the New Haven system. Thicarian cruisers brought their heavy weapons and thick armor, while Zephyrian swarm ships prepared to overwhelm enemies with sheer numbers. Zerothian vessels provided long-range scanning capabilities, and several other species contributed their own specialized skills. Krex found himself assigned to one of the human ships, officially as a liaison officer, but really as an observer for the Thicarian Empire. The vessel was larger than it had appeared from outside, with corridors that seemed designed for efficiency rather than intimidation. Everything was clean, functional, and strangely quiet compared to the constant noise of Thicarian warships. The human crew moved through their preparations with mechanical precision. There was no shouting, no displays of aggression, no ritual challenges or boasts about upcoming victories. They simply worked, checking systems, loading weapons, and reviewing tactical plans with the same calm professionalism they had shown during diplomatic meetings. Rodriguez stood at the center of the ship's command room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the tactical situation. The New Haven system was protected by a network of sensor platforms and automated defenses, but the slavers had disabled most of them during their initial attack. The remaining obstacles created a maze of potential approach routes, each one more dangerous than the last. Primary assault team will approach from Vector 7 Alpha, Rodriguez announced to the gathered officers. Stealth capabilities will allow us to penetrate the outer perimeter without detection. Once we're inside the system, we switch to active hunting mode. A Thicarian captain objected immediately. That approach route leads directly through an asteroid field. The gravitational anomalies will interfere with our navigation systems, and the slavers will have sensors covering every possible entry point. We should use our superior firepower to blast through their defenses directly. Rodriguez's response was patient but firm. Direct assault will result in hostage casualties. The slavers will execute prisoners the moment they detect our approach. We need to be inside their perimeter before they know we're coming. Zephyrian commander chittered his disagreement. Our swarm tactics can overwhelm their defenses quickly. Many small ships attacking from multiple directions will confuse their targeting systems. Some losses are acceptable if we achieve victory. No losses are acceptable, Rodriguez replied, her voice carrying a finality that ended the debate. Every hostage comes home alive. That is not negotiable. Krex watched the human planning session with growing unease. The other species were preparing for a battle, discussing acceptable casualty rates and victory conditions. The humans were planning something entirely different, something that treated the rescue of every single hostage as the only measure of success to Doctor. Torres appeared on the command center's communication screen, reporting from the medical bay. Trauma facilities are ready for immediate deployment. I have teams standing by to treat injuries from 19 different species. We're also prepared for psychological trauma counseling and long-term recovery support. What about the slavers? Asked a Saurian officer. Will you be treating their wounded as well? Torres's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. There won't be any wounded slavers to treat. The certainty in his voice made Krex's scales crawl. This was the same man who had spent days healing injured beings from across the galaxy, showing equal care to everyone who needed help. Now, he spoke about the coming battle with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. The fleet reached the outer edge of the New Haven system as the slavers' deadline approached. Grimjaw SEK sent another transmission showing more hostages and demanding immediate payment. His arrogance was obvious as he described the painful deaths he would inflict on the prisoners if his demands weren't met. Chin responded from the flagship, her diplomatic mask firmly in place. We are preparing to transfer the requested funds. However, we need time to verify the hostage's condition and ensure proper exchange protocols. We request a 12-hour extension to complete the transaction. The slaver leader laughed at the request. Humans and their endless talking. Very well, you have 12 hours. But if you try to trick me, I will make sure every hostage suffers before they die. The transmission ended, and the fleet began moving into the New Haven system. Krex expected the humans to brief the other species on their battle plan, but instead they simply wished them luck and began following their own route through the dangerous terrain. The human ships moved through space like ghosts, their stealth systems making them nearly invisible to sensors. Krex watched in fascination as they navigated passages that seemed impossibly narrow, threading between asteroids and sensor platforms with precision that required either incredible skill or complete insanity. How? Are we not being detected? He asked the human officer beside him. The slavers are expecting a frontal assault, she replied calmly. They're watching for large formations and aggressive movements. They're not looking for small groups, moving slowly through the back passages. As they penetrated deeper into the system, Krex began to understand the true nature of the human approach. This wasn't a battle plan designed to defeat the enemy in glorious combat. It was a hunting strategy meant to stalk prey that didn't know it was being hunted. The first slaver ship died without ever knowing the humans were there. One moment it was patrolling its assigned sector, the next it was drifting wreckage scattered across space. The attack had been so precise and so quiet that the other slavers didn't even realize they had lost a vessel. Target eliminated reported the weapons officer with the same tone he might use to announce the completion of a routine maintenance check. The systematic elimination of the slaver fleet continued with mechanical efficiency. Each ship was isolated, surrounded, and destroyed before it could send a warning to the others. The humans moved through their enemies like a plague, spreading through the fleet and leaving nothing but debris in their wake. Krex found himself pressed against the observation window, watching the human fighters work. They didn't engage in dramatic dogfights or flashy maneuvers. Instead, they used coordinated attacks and superior technology to ensure that every engagement was completely one-sided. The slavers never had a chance to fight back. This isn't warfare, he whispered himself. This is extermination. The human officer overheard his comment and turned to look at him. War is what happens between equals, she said quietly. This is something else entirely. The price of threatening what humans love. The final phase of the assault began as the human forces reached New Haven Colony itself. The slavers had fortified the settlement and positioned their remaining ships to cover all approach routes. They were confident in their defenses, certain that no rescue force could penetrate their stronghold without massive casualties among the hostages they held as shields. Rodriguez's voice came over the communication system, speaking to all human forces with the same calm professionalism she had shown during diplomatic meetings. Remember, hostages are the priority. Every slaver dies, but every hostage lives. Make it clean, make it quick, and make it final. The response from the human forces was immediate and unanimous. Understood, ma'am. No mercy for the slavers. No harm to the hostages. As the human assault began, Krex realized that he was watching the death of his illusions about this species. The gentle, peaceful humans who had arrived at Nexus Station were gone, replaced by something that moved with lethal purpose and spoke in voices that promised annihilation. The boarding operation began in complete silence. Krex found himself following a human assault team through the colony's maintenance tunnels, moving toward the main facility where the hostages were being held. The humans moved like liquid shadow, their footsteps making no sound on the metal flooring. Every motion was precise, calculated, and utterly deadly. The team leader was a human female named Lieutenant Sarah Park, a specialist in close combat operations. She communicated with her team through hand signals and subtle gestures, coordinating their movement with the efficiency of a machine. Behind her visor, her eyes were cold and focused, showing no emotion as they approached their targets. They encountered the first slaver guard at a junction between two corridors. The Saurian was armed with a heavy energy weapon and positioned to cover the main approach to the hostage area. He never saw the humans coming. One moment he was standing at his post, the next he was on the ground with his neck broken. The entire encounter lasted less than 3 seconds and made no noise at all. Krex stared at the dead slaver, shocked by the casual efficiency of the kill. Park had moved with the same calm precision she might use to open a door or check her equipment. There was no anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. She had simply eliminated an obstacle and moved on to the next task. The human team continued through the facility, leaving a trail of dead slavers behind them. Each kill was swift, silent, and absolutely final. The slavers never had time to raise an alarm or call for help. They simply ceased to exist, removed from the equation with surgical precision. In the main chamber, Grimjaw SEK was becoming increasingly agitated. His communications with the human fleet had been cut off, and his patrols were failing to report in. He suspected treachery, but couldn't understand how anyone could penetrate his defenses without triggering every alarm in the facility. Double the guards around the hostages, he snarled to his remaining subordinates. If those soft humans think they can trick me, they will learn the price of deception. The hostages huddled together in the center of the chamber, surrounded by nervous slavers who were beginning to realize that something was very wrong. Children from multiple species clung to their parents, while the adults tried to provide comfort despite their own terror. The executions from the previous day had left everyone in a state of shock, knowing that their lives could end at any moment. Park's team reached the chamber's upper levels, positioning themselves in the maintenance crawlways that ran above the main floor. Through the metal grating, they could see the entire hostage area and count every slaver guard. The human team spread out silently, each member taking position to cover a specific section of the chamber. Torres's voice came through their communication system, barely audible even through their enhanced hearing devices. Medical teams are in position. Trauma facilities are ready for immediate deployment. Priority treatment protocols are established for all species present. Understood. Park replied in a whisper that was quieter than breathing. Beginning hostage recovery in 30 seconds. What happened next defied everything Krex understood about combat. The human team moved with perfect coordination, dropping through the ceiling grates and eliminating the slaver guards before they could react. Each slaver was engaged simultaneously, ensuring that none of them could threaten the hostages or trigger any explosive devices. The rescue operation was over in less than 10 seconds. Every slaver guard was dead, their weapons secured, and the hostages were being moved to safety by human soldiers who had switched from lethal killers to gentle protectors in the span of a heartbeat. Krex watched a human soldier kneel beside a terrified Zephyrian child, offering comfort with the same hands that had just killed 3 slavers. The soldier's voice was soft and reassuring as he explained that everything would be okay, that the bad people were gone, and that help was coming. Torres arrived with his medical team, immediately beginning to treat the injured hostages. He worked with the same focused care Krex had observed on Nexus Station, but now he understood what drove that dedication. Every gentle touch, every soothing word, Every moment of compassion was balanced by the absolute ruthlessness he had shown toward those who had threatened his patience. Grimjaw SEK made his final stand in the facility's command center, surrounded by his remaining followers. He had rigged the colony's power core to explode, threatening to destroy the entire settlement if the humans didn't withdraw. His cybernetic jaw sparked with electrical discharge as he screamed threats and ultimatums at the advancing human forces. Rodriguez entered the command center alone, her hands empty and her expression calm. She looked at the slaver leader with the same polite attention she might give to a diplomatic negotiation. "You have one opportunity to surrender," she said quietly. "Disable the explosive device and release control of the facility. This is the only offer you will receive." Grimjaw SEK laughed with genuine amusement. "You think I fear death, human? I have terrorized this sector for 30 years. I will not be defeated by soft creatures who pretend to be warriors." Rodriguez nodded as if she had expected this response. "I understand you're not afraid of death, but you should be afraid of what comes before it." The slaver leader's expression changed as he realized that Rodriguez wasn't alone. Human soldiers had surrounded the command center, their weapons trained on every slaver present. But they weren't preparing to shoot. They were preparing to capture, and something in their stillness suggested that death would be a mercy compared to what they had planned. "You killed children," Rodriguez continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. "You tortured innocent people for your own profit. You made the mistake of believing that cruelty was strength, and you did it in front of a species that considers the protection of the innocent to be sacred." Grimjaw SEK's hand moved toward the detonator, but he never reached it. The human soldiers moved with the same precise efficiency they had shown throughout the operation, disabling the slavers without killing them. The explosive device was neutralized, the facility was secured, and the slaver leader found himself very much alive and completely helpless. "What are you going to do with us?" one of the captured slavers asked, his voice shaking with fear. That Rodriguez's response was delivered with the same calm politeness she had shown during diplomatic meetings. "You will be turned over to the appropriate authorities for trial and punishment. However, I should mention that the families of your victims have been notified of your capture. I'm sure they will be very interested in attending your legal proceedings." The implications of her words sank in slowly, and Krex watched the captured slavers' faces change from defiance to terror. They had spent years creating enemies across the galaxy, and now they would face justice administered by every species they had wronged. Death in battle would have been swift and honorable. What awaited them now would be neither. As the human forces completed their mission, Krex found himself observing their transition back to their peaceful roles. The same soldiers who had moved through the facility like angels of death were now helping hostages contact their families, providing comfort to traumatized children, and ensuring that everyone received proper medical care. The transformation was seamless and complete. Within minutes of the last slaver being captured, the humans had become the gentle, caring beings Krex had originally observed. They spoke in soft voices, moved with careful consideration for others, and showed infinite patience with the rescued hostages, but now Krex understood the truth. The humans' capacity for compassion wasn't separate from their capacity for violence. They were the same thing, two sides of a single coin that determined who deserved protection and who deserved destruction. The slavers had forced the humans to choose, and they had chosen with absolute finality. As medical teams treated the last of the injured hostages, Krex realized that he had witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had seen what humans truly were beneath their diplomatic facade, and the knowledge filled him with a terror that no amount of warrior training could overcome. 3 months had passed since the New Haven rescue, and life aboard Nexus Station had returned to what most beings considered normal. The same traders conducted their business, the same diplomats held their meetings, and the same maintenance crews kept the station running smoothly. To casual observers, nothing had changed except for the complete absence of slaver attacks throughout the sector. Krex knew better. He had spent those months watching the humans with new eyes, seeing patterns that had been invisible before. Commander Chun still conducted diplomatic negotiations with her usual patience and skill, but now other species listened to her with a different kind of attention. When the human diplomat suggested trade agreements or security arrangements, her words carried weight that had nothing to do with economic incentives. Doctor Torres continued his medical work in the station's hospital, treating patients from dozens of different species with the same gentle care he had always shown. But Krex observed how other beings spoke about him with a mixture of gratitude and awe. They remembered his dedication during the hostage crisis, how he had worked tirelessly to heal the rescued civilians while showing no mercy to those who had harmed them. Rodriguez still spent her evenings in the recreation areas, playing games and sharing stories with off-duty personnel from various military forces. Her friendly demeanor hadn't changed, but the other officers treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence. They had heard about the New Haven operation through unofficial channels, and they understood that the laughing human who bought drinks for everyone was also capable of orchestrating the complete destruction of an entire criminal organization. The most significant change was something that most beings didn't consciously notice, but felt nonetheless. The humans had quietly established a network of relationships, agreements, and mutual support systems that stretched across multiple sectors. They called it a friendship network, but Krex recognized it for what it truly was: the foundation of an empire built on loyalty rather than fear. Every species that had lost citizens to slaver attacks found themselves receiving offers of assistance from human medical teams, engineering specialists, and security advisors. The help came without conditions or payment requirements, offered simply because people had been hurt and needed support. But each act of kindness created a bond of gratitude that connected the humans to civilizations across the galaxy. The Zerothian Confederation had signed exclusive trade agreements with human worlds after their colonies received free medical supplies during a plague outbreak. The Crystalline Federation had established joint research programs with human scientists who had helped them develop new energy technologies. Even the proud Thakarian Empire had begun consulting with human military advisors after witnessing their tactical capabilities during the hostage rescue. Krex realized that the humans were doing something unprecedented in galactic history. They were creating an alliance based on genuine affection rather than military dominance or economic necessity. Species that had fought each other for centuries were now cooperating because they all shared positive relationships with the same human intermediaries. The fate of the Void Syndicate served as a constant reminder of what happened to those who threatened the humans' expanding circle of friends. The organization had been completely dismantled, not through dramatic battles, but through careful investigation and systematic elimination. Every slaver base had been located and destroyed. Every leader had been captured or killed, and every stolen resource had been returned to its rightful owners. Grimjaw SEK himself had been turned over to a tribunal composed of representatives from every species his organization had wronged. The trial had lasted for weeks, with victim after victim testifying about the suffering he had caused. The slaver leader had tried to maintain his arrogant defiance, but the weight of evidence and the hatred of his victims had broken him completely. His execution had been broadcast across the galaxy, serving as a warning to any other criminals who might consider targeting innocent civilians. But the real message wasn't about punishment for past crimes. It was about the price of threatening people under human protection. Commander Voss found Krex in the observation lounge one evening, staring out at the stars with a thoughtful expression. The older Thakarian settled his massive frame into a nearby chair, following Krex's gaze toward the distant lights of other worlds. "You have been quiet since the New Haven operation," Voss observed. "What conclusions have you reached about our human allies?" Krex was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I have learned that strength and weakness are not what I thought they were," he said. "Finally, I believed that true warriors showed their power through aggression and dominance. But the humans have taught me something different." He turned to face his commander, his eyes reflecting the wisdom that comes from witnessing something that changes everything you thought you knew about the universe. "The humans are not weak because they choose to be gentle," Krex continued. "They are strong because they can choose to be anything they want. They could have conquered the galaxy through force, But they decided to win it through friendship. They could have ruled through fear, but they chose to lead through love. That kind of strength terrifies me more than any weapon or warrior I have ever faced. Voss nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. You speak of the most dangerous kind of power, he said quietly. The power to choose restraint when you could choose violence. The power to show mercy when you could show conquest. The power to build rather than destroy. Yes, Krex replied. And now I understand why the other species follow them so willingly. It's not because they fear human weapons or human soldiers. It's because they trust human choices. They know that when humans promise protection, they mean it. When humans offer friendship, it's genuine. When humans threaten their enemies, those enemies disappear. The two Thicarians sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and contemplating the new reality that humanity had brought to the galaxy. Around them, the business of Nexus Station continued as always, but both warriors knew that everything had changed. What will you include in your report to the Empire? Voss asked eventually. Krex smiled, an expression that would have looked fierce on any other species, but somehow seemed peaceful on his scaled features. I will tell them that we have found the strongest species in the galaxy, he said, and I will recommend that we do everything in our power to make sure they consider us friends. As the two Thicarians made their way back to their quarters, neither of them noticed the human figure watching from the shadows of an adjacent corridor. Rodriguez had overheard their conversation, and she smiled with quiet satisfaction as she made her own way through the station. The humans had come to the galaxy as diplomats and explorers, seeking new friends and new opportunities for cooperation. They had found a universe filled with conflict, suffering, and cruelty. But instead of becoming bitter or cynical, they had chosen to be the change they wanted to see. They had shown the galaxy that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when it was not. They had demonstrated that the greatest warriors were not those who sought battle, but those who fought only to protect what they loved. And in doing so, they had achieved something that no empire in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had won not through conquest, but through choice, not through fear, but through hope, not through strength alone, but through strength tempered by compassion. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity had intended from the beginning. As Rodriguez reached her quarters, she paused to look out at the stars one final time. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling trade routes, protecting merchant vessels from pirates. Human doctors were treating patients in hospitals across dozens of worlds. Human teachers were sharing knowledge with alien students eager to learn. And if anyone threatened that peace, if anyone tried to harm the innocent or enslave the free, they would discover what Krex had learned on that day when everything changed. They would learn that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they were cruel or aggressive, but because they had the power to choose cruelty when necessary and the wisdom to choose kindness whenever possible. And that choice, that fundamental decision between light and darkness, protection and destruction, love and hate, was what made humanity truly terrifying to those who had chosen the wrong side of the equation. The galaxy belonged to those who chose to protect it, and humanity had made that choice long ago. The rest was just details.